unfortunately for me, I've nominated Rod as the keynote speaker, which means I simply need to talk and provide a human face, so without notes. Rod and I actually quite enjoy, we do a few things these days, and I think we both actually enjoy the fact that he's a journalist, you know, the scourge of the churches, and he's, you know, one of the representatives of the churches, and we're both able to speak on the same issue really comfortably and pleased that we can. I'm not the enemy. Rod's not my enemy, and it's nice that a churchman can stand up and speak on a moral issue and comfortably without having people putting an asterisk beside it. Because why can Rod? Because the Anglican Church, and particularly the Anglican Diocese in Newcastle, has very openly struggled and done a hell of a lot of work to come to terms with what it actually means to dehumanise people. And in the case of churches, they dehumanised children. They stripped children of their humanity, which allowed them then to place them in homes, to basically put them in situations where, as Rod said, they could and were abused. And why have I ended up speaking on this issue? It was because, as somebody who's written and researched this issue of child sexual abuse within institutions since 2006, and I've spoken to literally hundreds now of victims of historic child sexual abuse, and not just sexual abuse. As I said, sexual abuse is usually partnered with physical abuse, emotional neglect, emotional harm, because children have been in situations where there's been an abuse of power. Once you speak to that many people, I'm afraid the lessons that come from it, how did that happen, are stark, and you can't actually walk away from them. As a journalist, strictly speaking, I'm not even supposed to be doing this kind of thing. It's just, you're supposed to be objective, you're supposed to not campaign. Thank heavens I work for the Newcastle Herald, where they've sort of recognised that part of the reason why there was silence for so long about child sexual abuse in institutions is that people in the past have stuck within the narrow confines of what they saw as their responsibility. Take, for example, with the media, let's start with the media. The media stuck within the confines of how it saw child sexual abuse, which was, oh, there's that scary thing, and found excuses to not write about it. Police found different excuses to not step without their remit. If they didn't have a complaint, they didn't look at an issue. Churches themselves found oodles of excuses to explain away why they didn't have to act. And what happens when you stick to the script of that's not my responsibility, that's where the bad things happen. In the case that we have, and what I've found is I can't escape, and nor can the victims of historic child sexual abuse. We can't escape from seeing the parallels of what's happening now on Nauru with children and the most vulnerable people on earth, the homeless, who don't even have a home country. And Manus Island, the same, where we have young traumatised men and adult men in some kind of existential limbo, and they're stuck there because we want, as a government, Australia wants to send a message. So those people are basically being dehumanised for us to make some kind of political point. I've been, over the years, I've been asked over and over and again, how did the abuse of children, how did it stay quiet for so long? How didn't we know? And it was earlier this year, I actually woke up, again, I seem to have these sort of, it just shows what consciousness is like. You sleep and you wake up in the middle of the night. And I just thought, this is how it happened. You look at Nauru and Manus Island, what is it about them? They're offshore, so they're not in our faces. The media is restricted, can't get access within the centres. It is very difficult to actually get to Nauru, to actually overcome the visa hurdles and that kind of thing to report. There are credible allegations from credible sources, the Human Rights Commissioner, for heaven's sake. And then what happened when those credible allegations were raised in the public? The Human Rights Commissioner was attacked by no less than our own Prime Minister. The parallels with what happened in the past are stark. But this is, and I can speak strictly from a media point of view here. This has been set up in a way, the offshore, the difficulty of having public accountability, that's been obviously deliberate, because from a journalist point of view, again, I can make the parallel with the child sexual abuse issue. Back in 2007, I went to my boss at the time with a certain story that I wanted to run, but I didn't have quite enough to back all of it. And my boss said to me at the time, I want you to take the time, find the documents, find the information. I want no alleged in that story. I want to nail the bastards. And he was talking about the Catholic Church at the time. I took the time and we were able to nail the story. No alleged. The problem for journalists and then the problem for the public is that it is extraordinarily difficult in these circumstances not to have alleged right through the stories, because verification is virtually impossible. And that's why we have, on my way up here this morning, listening to a radio account of the woman who was alleged to have been raped, and then the allegations that flowed from that relating to her wanting a termination of the pregnancy that allegedly occurred after it, what was alleged to have been said and not said here in Australia, what our government then said alleged happened. And so you have a story, and I know from a journalist point of view, people listening to that, all of those, that network, that lovely spider web of alleged, there's doubt. And so there's one more story. Yet if you look at it, let's remove the alleged. What if we really do have a woman who was raped on Nauru in a situation where we know, find any of the government reports, what is one of the issues on Nauru in terms of women and children? Nauru has a problem with sexual abuse of women and children all on its own. It does not have the structures and systems to cope with that. So let's just say, remove remove the word alleged from that particular situation. We could bury a woman's been raped. A woman's then pregnant because of that. A woman then seeks help. A woman then tries to deal with the matter, and then a government basically puts a great big question mark over everything that's happened. And it's just horrific to even think of. Now, I think a lot of people in the community would be looking at it going, oh, for heaven's sake, it's only 93 children and fine, one woman's raped. Well, you know, it happens. It happens in Australia. The minute, can you see how easily it is to fall into that way of thinking? And believe me, that is what a lot of people do think, because certainly I get a lot of feedback as a journalist, and that is how people do look at it. But what an appalling slippery slope that is. And what does that say about us living in a democracy? And it's why we're here today. What it says is that we live in a country where we're prepared to have a situation where certain lives don't count. The minute you do that, where do you stop? And as I said, look at the Royal Commission. 2 weeks ago I was in Adelaide, and there was a man called Graham Rundle who gave evidence. Now Graham, extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary man. He was placed in a Salvation Army children's home at the age of 7. There he was brutally raped, physically abused, neglected, confined in a lot, just appalling, appalling stuff. When children, there was oversight, there was government oversight, and the Royal Commission made it very clear that it was completely ineffectual. Why? Simply because the government, the people who were tasked to actually care for children, failed appallingly. And you look at some of the documents, all available on the Royal Commission website, I might add, if you want to see them. The excuses that were made for people not to consider the children as individuals entitled to protection and entitled to the respect as individual human lives. We have that same situation. There's 93 children. Go to a local primary school here, pick 4 classrooms of children, and just say basically, I'm sorry, you're a lesser brand of humanity. And that's where I think it would strike home to people if they were allowed to think about it that way. And at the moment we have a government, even under our enlightened new Prime Minister, who appears to be wanting that to continue. I haven't said anything about this yet, but people will also ask, well, okay, we're here today. Does it actually count? Will anything happen? I can tell you on a couple of scores, yes, it does count. In 2006, I can tell you now, there weren't that many people talking about child sexual abuse within churches in any kind of systematic way. But over the years, you keep saying the truth, you keep putting information out there, you keep standing firm on a moral issue, more and more and more people join you. Now this is about the University of Newcastle having a contract with Transfield, and some people might say, well, okay, that's a little bit distant, you know, they're a company, they're entitled to work, and why are we carrying on about the university with Transfield? Because I was going to make a speech at the university here, and because I flagged with the university that I was going to have to speak on this issue and express my strong objection, I had a phone call from the Chief Executive Officer of Transfield, and we had a meeting. And so that was a meeting that was off the record and blah, 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 but I'm happy to say that we had that meeting. And I'm happy to say that some things are flowing from that. So that would be my message to you here. I'm just one person, and fine, you're a journalist, so you're sort of in a little bit of a situation where you can stick your neck out, but so are all of you. Transfield is a company that at the moment is making excuses for why it is able to do the job of the work with the government. Transfield at the moment is trying to ignore the fact that it is a moral issue. Transfield really is making excuses for what it's doing there. It's up to the community, it's up to those of you here to speak about it, it's up to us to put pressure on Transfield and anyone associated with it to say on a moral issue, the government has no right to put up the silence barriers. It absolutely has no right. And that's one of the main things that we've learned from the Royal Commission. People, organisations in power, institutions, when it comes to a moral issue, you absolutely have no right to stop the public from knowing what is being done in our names, and we actually have a responsibility to say, no, we don't accept that. It is our responsibility as citizens in a democracy to say no. And even if it's a few people, guess what? More and more and more people get that. Look at the David Hicks example. How many people were fighting for David Hicks and the fact that he was just kept in Guantanamo, in limbo for such a long time? It would have been, you know, 2 men, a woman and a dog. But by the end, that was a major issue for the Howard government, and they had to bring him back to us. They had to be seen to bring him back to Australia. So that would be my message here today. On moral issues, we have a responsibility. We are fortunate, all of us, to be in this wonderful country. But we have a responsibility to look after those people who are vulnerable. I'm really pleased that you're here today. And as I said, I'm a regional journalist working at the Newcastle Herald, and the CEO of Transfield rings me up seeking a meeting. They've got a problem there. Don't forget that.